Welcome to our countdown of the top 5 political lies that have shaped history. Buckle up, because we're about to take a wild ride through the dark underbelly of political maneuvering, where the truth is often the first casualty and the consequences are anything but fake news. These deceptions, folks, weren't just your run-of-the-mill white lies or exaggerations you might hear from a politician promising not to raise taxes. No, these were whoppers of a different breed. We're talking about the kind of lies that could start wars, topple governments, and leave entire nations scratching their heads in bewildered disbelief. So get ready to be outraged, because these historical hoodwinks serve as a stark reminder that even in the supposedly civilized world of politics, truth can be a pretty slippery concept.
Picture this. It's August 1964, the height of the Cold War, and tensions are running high in the Gulf of Tonkin off the coast of Vietnam. The US Navy destroyer, the USS Maddox, is on patrol when suddenly it reports being attacked by North Vietnamese torpedo boats. Now, there was an attack, that much is true, but here's where things get murky. Days later, the Maddox, along with another destroyer, the USS Turner Joy, reported a second attack. This alleged attack was chaotic, confusing, and, as it would later turn out, highly questionable. The Johnson administration, eager to escalate US involvement in Vietnam, seized on these incidents like a thirsty man at an oasis. They claimed that the attacks were unprovoked acts of aggression by North Vietnam, using this narrative to push through the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. This resolution, folks, was basically a blank check for war. It gave President Johnson the authority to deploy US military forces in Southeast Asia without a formal declaration of war. And you can bet your sweet bipartisanship they cashed that check faster than you can say domino theory. The problem is that second attack, that's where the phantom part comes in. Years later, declassified documents and the accounts of those who were there revealed that the second attack was, at best, a case of mistaken identity fueled by bad weather and jumpy nerves. At worst, it was a deliberate fabrication. The Gulf of Tonkin incident became a byword for government deception, a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked executive power, and a stark reminder that sometimes the fog of war can obscure the truth as effectively as any smokescreen. Fast forward to 2003, and the world is once again on the brink of war. This time, the setting is Iraq, and the Bush administration is making the case for invasion, brandishing the scariest three-letter acronym they can find, WMDs. The claim was simple, terrifying, and, as it turned out, completely bogus. The Bush administration, led by figures like Vice President Dick Cheney and Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, repeatedly insisted that Saddam Hussein's regime possessed weapons of mass destruction, posing an imminent threat to the United States and its allies. They painted a picture of a rogue state armed to the teeth with chemical and biological weapons, even hinting at ties to al-Qaeda and the possibility of Iraq supplying terrorists with these deadly weapons. The message was clear. Iraq was a ticking time bomb, and the only way to prevent a global catastrophe was to take preemptive action. The problem was there was no bomb, or at least not the kind they were selling. Despite exhaustive searches by the US military and international inspectors, no stockpiles of WMDs were ever found in Iraq. The intelligence used to justify the war was later revealed to be flawed, misinterpreted, or, in some cases, outright manipulated to fit a preordained narrative. The Iraq War, launched on the premise of non-existent weapons, led to hundreds of thousands of civilian deaths, destabilized the entire region, and cost the US trillions of dollars. This wasn't just a failure of intelligence, it was a failure of epic, world-altering proportions. The WMD lie eroded global trust in the United States, fueled anti-American sentiment, and left an indelible stain on the credibility of the Bush administration. Chapter 3, Watergate, a hotel, a break-in, and a scandal that toppled a president. Let's rewind the clock to 1972, to a time when disco was king. Bell-bottoms were all the rage, and a third-rate burglary at a Washington, D.C. hotel would unravel one of the biggest political scandals in American history. It all started at the Watergate Hotel, home to the Democratic National Committee headquarters. In the dead of night, a group of burglars were caught red-handed breaking into the DNC offices. It seemed like a bizarre and amateurish crime, But as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a tangled web of lies, cover-ups, and dirty tricks that stretched all the way to the Oval Office. At the center of it all was President Richard Nixon, a man who seemed to have a penchant for paranoia and a deep distrust of his political opponents. When the Watergate break-in was linked to his re-election campaign, Nixon and his administration went into full damage control mode. They denied any involvement in the break-in, dismissing it as a third-rate burglary attempt. They obstructed justice, intimidated witnesses, and destroyed evidence. But the truth, like a persistent cough in a quiet library, refused to be silenced. Thanks to the relentless work of journalists, investigators, and a few brave whistleblowers, the truth about Watergate slowly but surely unraveled. It turned out that the break-in was part of a broader campaign of political espionage and sabotage orchestrated by Nixon's re-election committee. Faced with impeachment and the prospect of criminal charges, Nixon resigned in disgrace in 1974. Watergate wasn't just a scandal, it was a national trauma. It shattered the public's faith in the presidency, fueled cynicism about government, and left a lasting legacy of distrust. Chapter 4. The Iran-Contra Affair, a secret arms deal gone wrong. Hold on to your hats because we're about to dive headfirst into the murky waters of Cold War covert operations with the Iran-Contra Affair. It's the 1980s, Ronald Reagan is president, and the Cold War is a geopolitical chess match being played out on a global scale. In Nicaragua, a leftist revolutionary group called the Sandinistas had overthrown the US-backed dictatorship, sending shockwaves through Washington. The Reagan administration, determined to roll back the tide of communism in Central America, was desperate to support the Contras, a right-wing rebel group fighting to overthrow the Sandinistas. There was just one tiny problem. Congress, fearing another Vietnam-esque quagmire, had passed a law explicitly prohibiting US military aid to the Contras. So what did the Reagan administration do? They did what any reasonable, law-abiding government would do. They found a loophole the size of the Rio Grande and drove a convoy of weapons right through it. Enter the Iran-Contra Affair, a scheme so convoluted and brazen it would make even the most seasoned political operative blush. In a nutshell, the plan involved secretly selling arms to Iran, which was then embroiled in a bloody war with Iraq. The idea was that by cozying up to Iran, the Reagan administration could secure the release of American hostages being held in Lebanon by Hezbollah militants with ties to Tehran. All very hush-hush, of course, but here's where it gets really interesting. Instead of putting the money from the arms sales back into the US Treasury, where it belonged, the Reagan administration decided to use it to fund the Contras. That's right, folks. They were literally selling weapons to an enemy to fund a war that Congress had explicitly forbidden them from fighting. It was a classic case of the ends justifying the means, except in this case the means were illegal and the ends were about as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. Chapter 5. Brexit, the £350 million promise that went up in smoke. Fast forward to 2016 and the political world is once again in a state of dizzying disarray. The UK decided to withdraw from the European Union. A powerful slogan became a rallying cry. We send the EU £350 million a week. Let's fund our NHS instead. This claim, plastered on a big red bus, was about as subtle as a brick through a window. The problem was, that figure was about as accurate as a weather forecast in a hurricane. It ignored the UK's rebates and investments back into the UK economy. Despite warnings, the allure of that magic number proved too strong for many voters. In the aftermath, the £350 million promise went up in smoke. The UK economy took a hit, negotiations were complicated, and the promised windfall for the NHS never materialised. Outro, the high cost of political lies. From the battlefields of Vietnam to the streets of London, these incidents remind us that in the world of politics, the truth is often a fragile and elusive thing. These lies, spun for political expediency or to cover up wrongdoing, have had a profound and lasting impact on the world, shaping the course of history and eroding public trust in those who claim to represent us. The really depressing part, this is just a top 5. We could have easily done a top 50 or a top 500 if we're being honest. But the point is, These incidents serve as a stark reminder of the importance of transparency and accountability in politics. So, the next time you hear a politician making a promise that seems too good to be true or spinning a tale that doesn't quite add up, remember these cautionary tales. Stay informed, question the narratives presented to you, and never ever underestimate the power of a good lie. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more insightful content.